Pick any man near you right now, on the train, behind a counter, on the other side of a bar. His Y chromosome passed down from his father, and his father's father barely changed for tens of thousands of years. Somewhere along that exact chain, a few thousand years back, something happened that left almost no trace anywhere except in the DNA itself. Women's family lines kept growing through the same stretch of time. Men's lines almost stopped. Whatever caused it, it knew how to tell the difference. The obvious guess is something big, a plague, a famine, years of failed harvests. That's the natural assumption. But could any of those really pick out men specifically, generation after generation, while leaving women's lines untouched? Disease doesn't read a chromosome before it infects someone, and neither does a bad winter. Whatever thinned those lines stayed selective, by sex alone, for thousands of years straight. In 2015, geneticist Monica Carmen led a team that sequenced 456 Y chromosomes from 110 populations. At the worst point, they calculated one surviving male lineage for every 17 surviving female ones. Before farming, that ratio had sat close to even. Carmen's own paper stayed cautious, pointing only to unspecified cultural shifts in how unevenly men reproduced. If a discovery written straight into your own chromosomes is worth following all the way down, subscribe now. This is only the beginning. The real explanation for that number turned out to be written somewhere else entirely. In the ground. For most of human history, nobody owned land because nobody stayed anywhere long enough to claim it. Farming changed that math. A cleared field was worth defending for life, and worth inheriting afterward. A son's chromosome stopped being private biology, it became a legal claim, and people have always killed over those. In 1983, in a garden plot near the German town of Talheim, archaeologists found 34 skeletons in a single pit. 16 were children. Every skull that could be examined showed blunt force fractures, mostly from stone tools. Almost none showed the defensive wounds that come from raising an arm to block a blow. There were no grave goods, no ceremony, just bodies thrown in together. 2 decades on, excavators found more remains at a site called Schletz in Lower Austria. At least 200 people lay at the bottom of a defensive ditch, possibly closer to 300, once unexcavated sections are counted. Almost all of them turned out to be unrelated to one another, a large, established population, not some small band caught off guard. Several skulls were missing entirely. Some bodies were missing arms or legs, cut away rather than simply broken. Almost no young women turned up among the dead at all. Archaeologist Christian Meyer later examined 26 more bodies at a site called Schöneck-Kilienstetten, mostly young men, killed by blows to the back of the skull. Several had been kneeling when they died. Their shins were broken afterward, which does nothing practical to a corpse. It only means something to whoever's doing the breaking. Meyer put it to a reporter in one line: "These people were held prisoner and executed." Sites like these aren't rare exceptions. Dozens of comparable mass graves turn up across roughly the same stretch of Neolithic Europe. The pattern barely changes from one to the next, mostly adult men and older boys, almost no young women. Scale that same ratio up to today's global population, and matching it through killing alone would mean several billion men gone in a single generation. The killing wasn't confined to single afternoons either. At a rock shelter in Spain, called San Juan ante Portum Latinum, researchers examined 338 skeletons. Bodies were stacked as much as 8 deep, mixed with at least 41 arrowheads that still showed damage from striking flesh. One man had been shot straight through the pelvis. The arrowhead was still lodged in the bone when archaeologists opened the site. Just over 23% carried some kind of violent injury, most of it in teenage and adult men. For a lot of these men, getting attacked wasn't a single bad day. It was closer to a job hazard. Some of this violence was painted, not just buried. In a shelter called Les Dogs, on Spain's Mediterranean coast, someone painted roughly 30 archers mid-battle, legs bent in stride, one side clearly falling back. It's one of the oldest images of organized combat anywhere on Earth. A rarer, stranger version of these paintings shows archers surrounding an unarmed figure, arrows already in him. Their arms are raised in a pose that reads less like combat than celebration. Nobody today can say what that man had supposedly done. The weapons in those scenes were real. At La Draga, a lakeside site in Catalonia, archaeologists recovered a complete yew longbow, over a meter long. It's the oldest complete bow found in Europe. Its arrows strung with sinew from goats, deer, and pigs. Killing efficiently was, apparently, worth planning for generations in advance. Then there's Herxheim, in Germany, which complicates the story, instead of confirming it neatly. Discovered in 1996, the site holds fragmented remains of somewhere between 500 and well over 1,000 people. Bioarchaeologist Bruno Boulestin ruled out every alternative burial custom he could think of, one at a time. Cannibalism, he concluded, was the only explanation left standing. Project leader Andrea Zeblans expects the true toll to run twice as high as what's already been dug up, and this in a village small enough to count in houses, not streets. Some of the pottery buried with the bodies had traveled 500 kilometers to get there. Whether that means an elaborate massacre or a ritual site older than any religion we'd recognize is still unresolved. What's certain is only the raw material, men, killed in large numbers, far from home. The violence around this collapse wasn't confined to one century either. High in the Catalan Pyrenees, someone was shot from behind with a flint arrow that lodged in a rib. They survived, the bone healed completely around it. Archaeologist Carlos Tornero led the 2025 study on the find. He called it direct proof of one violent episode from that same stretch of centuries. History already offers proof that war alone can do this to a bloodline, with no ambiguity required. In 2003, geneticist Tatiana Zerjal traced a single Y chromosome lineage across a huge stretch of Asia. Roughly 8% of men there carry it today, some 16 million living men, all likely descended from one man, Genghis Khan. His sons fathered children across the territory his campaigns covered, until the family tree looked pruned by hand. At least he left written records to explain it. So why would clan warfare erase entire lines this efficiently, instead of just thinning them at the edges? In 2018, Stanford geneticist Tian-Chen Zheng named the mechanism cultural hitchhiking. Neolithic men belonged to patrilineal clans, sharing nearly the same Y chromosome within each one. Wipe out a rival clan in one raid, and an entire branch of the genetic tree vanishes in an afternoon. That signature survives today in haplogroup R1b, traced to Bronze Age migrations off the steppe. Somewhere behind you, if you're a man, sits a Y chromosome that made it through exactly that filter. So does the one behind every man walking past you today, on the street, at the coffee counter, across a bar. Trace either side of your family back far enough, and it runs through the same narrow gate almost everyone else's did. Dozens of parallel lines went quiet across roughly the same stretch of centuries. It happened on a continent that hadn't invented writing yet, so nobody could carve a name over where they ended. You didn't inherit a name from any of those men, or a grave, or a single sentence about who they'd been. You inherited the fact that they lost, and somebody else won. No genealogy website markets it that way. No family tree carries a footnote for it. It just sits there quietly, holding the whole tidy chart up. None of this closes every gap, and it's worth saying plainly where the evidence actually stops. Nobody alive can prove this played out as one continent-wide war. It might have been thousands of smaller, unrelated conflicts unfolding independently that happened to end the same way for 4,000 years running. Carmen's own paper never claimed more certainty than the data actually supported. A minority of researchers argue that war isn't strictly necessary for the math to work at all. Ordinary clan growth alone, they say, could crowd out rival lines on its own. One dominant elephant seal fathers most of a beach's pups without ever throwing a punch. Nobody, so far, has dug up a Neolithic village that quietly outbred its neighbors into irrelevance. Every time the ground gets opened in this period, what turns up looks like war-broken skulls, lodged arrowheads, paintings of the fight. The honest answer is that both mechanisms probably operated together, in proportions nobody today can measure with any real precision. Trace it back far enough, and your line threads between raided villages and quietly expanding clans, and comes out the other side. 16 lines, or 17, for every one that made it. Nobody kept their names. Nobody wrote down why. The only record left sits in the chromosomes of the men reading this right now. If this changes how you look at your own bloodline, subscribe, drop a comment with your take, and hit like before you go.